We have today another awards winning site, and this site has some cool animation. But in this video, we're going to be specifically talking about one animation that looked really nice and I really wanted to teach you guys. So this is the process page, and if I start scrolling down, you'd see that they have a bunch of sections, and then when you start scrolling through, you can see that the previous one sort of pins itself and then rotates and hides itself underneath and makes room for the next incoming section. So this is a very cool way of showcasing different sections in your website. Now you can use this to showcase the different projects that you have worked on, or if you have, let's say, different steps involving any specific project, you can showcase that, or including if you have some gallery, you can showcase his images like this. So it's a really cool way of implementing various sections in your website. So I tried replicating it. So here what we have. So this is the intro section. And then once I start scrolling, the pin section starts coming in. So this is the first one. It sort of rotates and starts hiding itself, makes room for the second one. And then if I keep scrolling, the second one sort of comes in, it rotates. And then as you can see, the even one sorts of rotate in a different angle, as well as the odd one in the other angle. It's really cool way of showcasing the different sections and containers in your website. So this is what we're going to be building in this video. So the source code of this is in the description, so you guys can download and play with that. Also, the live link of this is in the description, and I tried to make it responsive so you can also open and try this on your mobile devices as well. So without any delay, let's get started and let's learn to build this. All right, so here I am in my index.html file, which has a bunch of stuff. We'll be going through these in a bit, but let me also show you how this stuff gets rendered on the browser. So here we have the intro section, which has a heading, a text at the center. We scroll down and we get our pin cards. Now this has the index or the number of the section, a title, an image, and then also a bit of description. And then the outro section is same as the intro, which has a heading and then a bit of text underneath. Now, if you look at the HTML, so we basically have three divs. One's intro, then you have the content, which is the pin card, and then the outro. Now here, mistakenly, I added also the class of intro, but when you download the source code, you won't have this. I'll probably remove this because you don't really need it. And this is gonna be outro. So there's that. And so if I show you how it looks, so we have H2 with text, including the SVG inside of the span, and then we have the p tag. And similar way, we have it for the outro as well. So there's nothing too complicated in these two sections. Now this pin card section has an overlay div, the span, which basically is placed on the left side. Then you have the pin card content, which has the H2 image and then the actual description inside of the p tag. Now this overlay, the reason for adding an overlay instead of reducing the opacity of the pin card. Now you may think that when the cards basically get pinned, the previous card you might have seen that they become a bit, they have a sort of like a overlay, or they become a bit blackish on color. Now we could have added opacity, so we could have reduced the opacity of the pin card component, but that's not a good solution. The reason for that is because when you reduce the opacity of any element, the element underneath that is also visible. So we don't really want element underneath one specific pin card to be visible. So you might be scrolling through the third one, and then if you have the third one as opacity as 0.5 or something, then you would also see through the pin card that is right before, which is the pin card 2. And also through that, you'd see the pin card 1. So that's not a good way. So instead, I like to add an overlay, and then we can basically play with the background color of this overlay. And that's a much better way to add. So there's that. And then this is this is basically the thing that we have in the styling. So there's nothing much. I don't think we have anything too complicated stuff. It's just basic styling, which you can obviously do. And then also I added a bit of responsiveness so that it looks good on mobile devices as well. And then apart from that, one last thing that you need to add is to all the pin card component, you need to add a bit of perspective. So here we have the perspective as 1000 pixels. Now you can add whatever amount of perspective you want, but we need this perspective just so that when we start to add the scrolling or the rotating effect, this perspective adds more depth to the animation and it makes it stand out more. So you also need to add this perspective. So that's basically it for the HTML. I'll just quickly paste in the other sections as well. Now, when I save, you can see the first one is RER2. We have Ragnarok. We have Last of Us, Sekiro, and then Elden Ring. So these are the sections. Now, if you look down here, I've also imported GSAP, ScrollTrigger, as well as Lenis. Now let's start to add our JavaScript and let's um, bring this to life. So here I'm gonna start with the script tag. Now the thing that I pasted here, you can just get it from Lenis' documentation. It's just the standard code that binds Lenis and ScrollTrigger, including GSAP together. And then you can use Lenis with ScrollTrigger. So now when I start scrolling, the scrolling feels much smoother. And then also when we integrate ScrollTrigger onto the various triggering points to have the animation, it's gonna look even smoother. So yeah, so this is the code. There's nothing too complex. You can just paste it from the Lenis's documentation. Now starts our real deal. So first what we do is we grab all the different pin cards that we have. We store it in an array and then let's call it pin cards. Now I'm just going to be disabling this cursor because it gives us unnecessary suggestions. So we have this pin cards. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to loop through each of the individual pin cards and we want to add a scroll trigger to each of them. So we have the pin cards, we're running for each. And then now what happens is if you have seen the final one, so one thing to note is that we don't have the scrolling or the triggering effect onto all the different pin cards that we see. We just exclude the last one. The reason for that is because if we also add this onto the last one, we won't have room to have the scroll. So we want to leave the last one as is, and then we just want to add the triggering points to all the other four. So we just check that if this index, if this is less than the length of the pin cards minus one, basically we check if this is not the last one. If this is not the last one, you add the scroll trigger. The triggering point would be each card, whichever index is that. So that specific card. And then where do you want to start it? So you take the top of the card and then you take the top of the viewport. So as soon as the top of the card hits the top of the screen, what you want to do is you want to start to have the animation. And then when do you want this trigger to end? So we're gonna have two scroll triggers. The first scroll trigger would be responsible for the pinning effect that we have. So this pinning effect should go on till the last card. So the end trigger would be pin cards dot length, which is the length of the pin cards minus one. Basically, we exclude this onto we exclude the last one. So it's gonna go on till the fourth one, and then it's gonna end. And then where do you want the animation to end? The animation should end at the top, basically. So top of the card and then top of the screen. And then what do you want to do? We want to have the pin as true. Let's save. And now if I refresh and if I scroll, you can see that these start to get pinned. But there's a bit of an issue, and that is you see that these aren't that smooth, and then these get stuck, but then we have a lot of room to scroll. So we don't really want that. So for that, we just have to add a pin spacing to false, just so that we don't get the extra scrolling, even though this gets pinned. So now, as you can see, we have this cool pinning. And now right after the fifth one ends, we can scroll and it no longer pins. All right, so we're done with that. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to add another scroll trigger. And then this scroll trigger would be responsible for adding the animation to the previous cards. So what we do is we add the scroll trigger, and what we do is we take the triggering points. Now, the triggering points would be, so when you scroll down and when this section appears, it's all fine as long as the second section doesn't start coming in. So as the second section comes in, what happens is the first section, the previous one, starts rotating and hiding itself. So what happens is the triggering point would be the index or the cards that is coming next to the current card. So we have the trigger, and that is pin cards, the current index plus 1, basically the next card that's coming. And then where does it start? It starts at the top of the card and when it hits the bottom of the screen. So the animation starts when the element, which is the second card incoming, when that hits the bottom of the screen, you want the animation to start. And when do you want to stop? When the top of the incoming card, which is the next card, hits the top of the screen. That's basically it. And then what do you want to do? So we want every time we scroll, we want this to update. It takes in a function when we're basically giving the self. Now the self has this progress function, which basically gives us the value of how much we have scrolled through. So here we're just going to get the progress, and then we will manually set the styling for each individual card. So we can use gsap.set. We get each card. Now here, this each card is not the next card. The next card only acts as the triggering point. This each card is the current card that you want to animate. Now this card, what would happen is the first thing that happens is it scales down. So initially it's 1, but as we scroll down, we want it to subtract from 1. So 1 minus the progress, or how far you have scrolled, multiplied by 0.25, because we don't want it to scale down too much. So we reduce the value of progress by multiplying it by 0.25. So that's the scaling. We also want it to rotate. So the rotation would be alternatively different. So if it's an even one, then we want the progress multiplied by 5, and that's going to be your rotation. If it's not an even one, if it's an odd one, then you take the negative of progress times 5. So basically, they would alternate along left and right if they're even or odd. And then would also want to rotate the card along the x-axis. So this would again check if this is an even one or an odd one. If it's an even one, you multiply by 40. If not, you multiply by negative 40. And then what we do is let's save first and let's see what's actually happening. So when you refresh and when you start scrolling down, you can see that they rotate and then they basically hide themselves. Now we'd also want to add the animation for the overlay, or basically we want the overlay. So initially the overlay had the opacity of 0. So what you want to do is you slowly want to increase the opacity of this as you scroll. So just add opacity and then you multiply progress by 0.4 or 0.5, whichever value you feel is more suitable. And then that's basically it. So when I start scrolling, you'd see that as I scroll, the opacity of the overlay increases and this becomes darker in shade, and then it hides itself. Now the second one, third, fourth, and then the fifth one is the one that ends with, and yeah, looks pretty nice. So yeah, that's it for this video. Hope it was fun. The source code as well as the live link of this would be in the description, so you guys can go and check it out. And make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you're new and if you haven't subscribed yet. I bring in cool stuff like these every week, and we're very close to hitting 5,000 subscribers. And once we hit 5,000 subscribers, I'm gonna be doing a giveaway. Now, what you guys have to do to enter the giveaway, I'll be letting you guys know in my next video. But yeah, that's it for this video. Meet you guys in the next. Till then, bye bye, take care, and peace.